Nigel, congratulations on your honours degree today at Keele. A few questions for you. First of all, 1,500 games under your belt. Tell us, how did it all begin, and what do you think are the biggest changes in sports broadcasting since you first started?
Well, how did it begin? That's an interesting one, because that goes back to 1968, when Radio Stoke had just begun. And my late father was the secretary of the North South and South Cheshire Cricket League. And there was one game left in the season. 4 teams could win the championship. And I was playing for one of those teams, Port Hill Park. And we were playing Leek in the final game at home. My father was invited to Radio Stoke for the secretary's eye view of the final games. And I took him up there on the Friday evening. And the presenter said, "Aren't you playing tomorrow?" I said, "Yeah, I am actually. I'm playing for Port Hill. Would you mind doing an interview?" I said, "Yeah, fine, no problem." So I did. And very cheekily on the way out, I said, "How do you get into this broadcasting game?" And he said, "Bring John Aberley." Well, of course, John Aberley is synonymous with journalism and broadcasting in this area. I said, "Right, thank you very much." Well, nothing done. But at the start of the next season, I rang John. He said, "Yes, do us a game, 1969. I said, "OK, I won't play, I'll do a game." Which I did. Newcastle and Hartshill against Great Chell. I said, "What do I do? Ring at 5 to 6, programme at 6, you do a piece telling us exactly what's happening." I did. And about 3.5 minutes into my chat, the phone went click. Silence, just a burr. And I thought, well, that's it. In more ways than one. That's the end of the phone call, it's the end of me. Went home, and that was it. I never got a call till the start of the next season. And John was on, "Why didn't you get in touch with us?" I said, "Well, I thought I'd blown it." Don't be silly. I want you to cover cricket." So I covered the cricket, but then towards the end of the season, Willie could cover football. And I said, "Where?" "Oh, we want you to do Vale and Stoke away." I said, "I can't be away every Saturday." Stoke away. I could only do away games because I was a member of the NUT, National Union of Teachers, not the National Union of Journalists. And they were very protective in those days. So that's how it started. And the first football match was 1970, away West Bromwich Albion. And it's been rolling on ever since. What changes in broadcasting? Well, it all started on a telephone. My reports on football matches, 5 to 3, team news, half time, 2.5 minutes, full time, 2.5 minutes. If there was a goal, ring in. Now, of course, it's programme starting at 2 o'clock. No telephones, ISDN line, quality line presentation, line sound, headphones, microphones, changed out of all proportion. I think one of the best memories I've got is nothing to do with football. It was in 2000 when Sir Stanley Matthews died, and Radio Stoke were putting their broadcasting package together at the funeral. And you may remember that the hearse came to the Britannia Stadium, and then there was the tour of the city and the funeral at Stoke Minster. And they said, would I do the broadcasting from the Britannia Stadium and then hot foot it to Stoke Minster, where there was a caravan at the back of the church with a monitor, and would I then pick up the arrival of the hearse, the service, etc. And that was perhaps the non-sporting highlight of my broadcasting, because it was such a fantastic occasion. And to have been, in effect, the lead voice talking about one of the finest footballers to have ever lived. And that was certainly a pinnacle. Football-wise, obviously, FA Cup final, which was the pinnacle of Stoke at the moment. Going into Europe, first game since the 70s at Hajduk Split, Ryan Shotton, who was a former pupil of mine at Grange, popping in a goal until Martin Spink says, I think we'll have to give it as an own goal. I said, well, thank you for that. But it was the victory. Stoke had kicked off with the victory. Ninian Park, with the ball going in off Honorary's backside to get them into the final at the Millennium Stadium. All these have been highlights. I mean, I've been very, very lucky to be able to commentate on local radio and also run education in parallel. So I feel very fortunate. Well, Lou Macari was superb. I remember dropping a big clanger at Tranmere. I think it was 1985, when at half-time they made a change of goalkeeper. Carl Middleton came off and Ronnie Sinclair went in goal. And I must admit, I hadn't noticed it. And we were sharing the broadcast at that time with Radio Merseyside. And really, it was my job to point out to them that Stoke had made a change. So it was down to me. And at the end of the game, there'd been 3 superb saves at the start of the second half. And when I went down to the dressing room to get to Lou for the interview, everybody was swarming around Ronnie Sinclair. And I said to Ian Bailey, who was doing the central reports, I said, what are they doing around Ronnie? I said, you've got a transfer. I said, he pulled off 3 fantastic saves at the start of the second half. I said, Ronnie? He says, yeah. Ronnie came on for the second half for Middleton. Well, the walls were white, and my face went as white as the walls in the dressing room. Going back to the press box, I said to Lou, I dropped a clanger, Lou, today. So I told him what I'd done. He said, over they come to do an interview with Lou live. And I said, well, Lou, before we do the interview, I've got to apologise to the listeners for the clanger that I dropped. And so Middleton messed it up. He was substituted Ronnie Sinclair in. And Lou said, Nigel, anybody could have made that mistake. You mustn't flog yourself. Carl Middleton, 6'1", dark hair. Ronnie Sinclair, 5'10", fair hair. Anybody could have made that mistake. And I sat there and I looked at him, and his eyes were twinkling because that was Lou Macari. He'd always got an impish grin. If you asked him a pertinent question, he'd look at you and you'd think, I'm going to get an answer. And then he'd go on off at a tangent and you'd think, yeah, okay, fine. Very, very nice man, Lou, but as I say, a total imp. But Stoke City through and through. And I had some excellent interviews with him. The most difficult one, well, one of the most difficult ones was Chris Kamara. Because, as you remember, he had a torrid time, 15 games, 1 win, I think it was. And I remember we were at Stockport, evening game, and he came up to the stand to do the interview. And I said, well, yet another defeat, Chris. Yes, I know. He says, but I do know how to put it right. I said, well, okay, $64,000 question, how? And he looked at me. He took his eyes opened wide and he physically moved back. He said, it's not as straightforward as that nose of yours on your face. And he stormed off. And as he got to the stairwell, I should have turned him, and we came out with some choice language, which fortunately wasn't picked up on the microphone. And I said, well, Chris Kamara's gone off into the dying sunset, and we're not getting a comment. Next game was away at Bury. And I was waiting outside the dressing room door, and out he came. And I said, am I persona non grata? Do I get an interview or not? He says, you dare to mention $64,000 questions. He says, and I'll have you. I said, okay, fine. So we did get an interview, but he was a very prickly customer. Purely and simply, he was not having any success at Stoke. Joe Jordan, when he pulled the microphone out, it was like a cobra coming out of a bamboo bag. He was frightened to death. He'd be talking to you quite nicely. And he'd say, okay, Joe, shall we do the interview? And as soon as that mic, as I say, it's just like a cobra coming up. And he froze. And the interview was very, very difficult with him to get anything out of him. But big contrast. Tony Pulis fine, Lou Macari fine, Brian Little fine, all of them pretty well fine. But one has always got to remember that a manager is raw if they've lost 20 minutes after a game. And I know supporters quite right say he doesn't ask the right question. He's not asked him this. If you're standing there with a microphone and you're looking at the manager, you know that if you just twitch that nerve too much, he's going to turn around and say, I'm saying no more, I'm off. And you've lost the opportunity of talking to him.